books, I read all of them. Frankly, I would say, it's okay that they weren't at the top of the charts for bestsellers, but for everybody here, you will enjoy them because Lawrence wrote them. And because the narrator tells stories with many, many asides. And those asides could only be made by Lawrence Friedman. And they're going to be familiar to everybody. And you're going to laugh. So there you go, a couple years after our trip, he talks about how he went to the Strip in Las Vegas, that amazing street, unique, I guess, in the whole wide world. It's as if somebody had held a giant contest for architects. Who could win the vulgarity prize? Who could design the most massive, tasteless pile of glass and concrete? The winner gets to build it on the Strip. But every few years, there's another contest, and a bigger, more outrageous casino hotel goes up in all its glory. They have all these theme hotels: ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, Paris, New York, Venice, complete with gondolas. I mean, it's madness. I have a great idea for Las Vegas. Why not a Vatican City theme, including a full-scale replica of St. Peter's Square wrapped around the casino and a restaurant with a copy of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Yeah. The employees will be dressed up as monks, priests, and nuns. The managers as cardinals. And maybe they can hire a few real monks, priests, and nuns. Yeah, but he goes on from there. So, one last thing about Lawrence. The Red Kimono is a great book, but it's not my favorite book of his many books. My favorite of his books is The Horizontal Society. And it's hard to pick because they're so great. But I was looking through this last night and it absolutely blew me away. Lawrence's prescience. This was written in the late 90s, before we had, Facebook and Twitter and social media. And he's talking about the dangers of technology in a horizontal society in terms of leading to prejudice, nationalism, and anti-democratic results. This was incredibly prescient because that's Lawrence. And I just want to read one sentence here. When he talks about, as you all know, in this country, there's a really bad word that's bantered around by people like the governor of Manuel's state, Florida. And that horrible word, I'll say it quietly, is a globalist. If you're a globalist, you're a very, very suspicious person these days. And even though Lawrence is an expert in American law, between us and don't let it go out that door, Lawrence is a globalist. That's why he loves you, and that's why we're together. And he talks about how we have to overcome nationalism, intolerance, hatred, and aggression and become globalists, And he says the good society is in some ways easy to describe. It's a society of true pluralism, as far as that is possible. It's a society with respect for other people and their ways of life, their languages, religions, and lifestyles. It's multicultural in the best sense of the word. Different cultures and values mingle and enrich each other. And he goes on. But that's familiar to everybody in this room as Lawrence's values that we share and that we had the privilege of enjoying with him. So I would actually say that, SPILS is the Stanford Program in International Legal Studies, but what it really stands for is so pleasurable and incredible to be Lawrence's student. Everybody knows that in this room, including me. So I want to conclude with a few personal thoughts. When I was the academic director The most fantastic part of my job was I made a telephone call to everyone who was admitted all over the world. I mean, that was before the old days of WhatsApp, so I'm sure I racked up some long distance fees on the Stanford Law School bill. But I called people all over the world to say congratulations. We really hope you come to Stanford. And those conversations were so joyful, and many of those conversations were the beginning and first conversation with someone I enjoyed a lifelong conversation with. So I feel really happy about that. And to speak very personally, I remember the very first day I taught the SPILS seminar, and I can't forget it. I can tell you the date, September 9th, 2000. How come I know that? Because our son Kenji was born a few hours before that class on September 8th, the night at like 2 a.m. And I remember taking a shower and saying, am I going to go teach? And I said, yes, I'm going to go teach. And so my life personally is so connected with SPILS. Is Luis here? Yeah. You know, Luis brought his son yesterday. We had a party at our house for Thanksgiving, and Luis and Marcella were holding their little baby, and Natsuko was holding our baby. And now yesterday, that little baby, or one of the babies, was here as an incredible grown-up who's going to Stanford. No. Yes, unbelievable. And Yahong Lee, I don't know if you remember her. She had a baby during her SPILS year, and she came to see us last year because her little baby born in SPILS is now going to Stanford. So there's this incredible continuity. And I would say, you know, in conclusion, that, you know, everyone heard Lauren say when he welcomed that SPILS class, he would say, this is the best SPILS class we've ever had. Everyone knows that. But it was true. It was true, not because it was incrementally better every year, but for Lawrence, you're the best. And I feel the same way. I feel so happy and enriched by being with you. And frankly, as a teacher, seeing how far everyone has come and your accomplishments, surpassing mine significantly, that's the happiest thing I can experience as a teacher. So I just want to say I feel so proud of all of you and so happy to be here to honor Claire. I mean, to honor Lewis. Forgive me. So, you know, I also want to, you know, keep the invitation open to please reach out to me and continue this lifelong relationship that Lawrence Friedman helped us start. Thank you.
Lawrence, somebody wrote a message in the chat. They're watching via Zoom. Mauricio Duce. So Mauricio Duce writes, and he's watching. I wanted to send my warmest regards to Lawrence. Unfortunately, I was unable to travel. Chile is a bit far away. I met Lawrence in September of 1998. I think I fell in love with him at the first meeting we had before the start of the SPILS classes, when I went to visit him at his office. We had a long conversation, and at that moment, it became clear to me that it was not a mistake to go to Stanford, but one of the best decisions of my life. While I have not been able to be as present in Stanford activities these past few years, I always feel that Lawrence is an important part of my life. Lawrence, I love you very much, and so does my family. Receive a big hug and a kiss for Leah, your Chilean friend, Mauricio. So Mauricio, Lawrence is here. Can he see him? Mary Elizabeth? Yeah. Very eloquent. There is a message from Donald Trump. Who wants to go? Well, since there's no message, nobody wants to read the Trump message. Who wants to share an anecdote? The idea of this hour was to, of course, you know, share emotions. Thank you, Jonathan, for being so eloquent, and Mauricio as well, but also things that happened during your SPILS year. Who wants to go on? Nothing happened.
Nothing.
That's close. But you don't have anecdotes, Lawrence. You should say
No,
something.
I'm not gonna, okay.
There you go.
A word of criticism. I'm not supposed to make critical comments, but I wish people would stop talking about me and talk about the SPILS program, because I thought that's what this is supposed to be. That's okay. It's whatever you did. It's wonderful. Yesterday, Manuel said that I liked everybody. Well, it's actually not true. I liked everybody who was there. That much is true. But I mean, my family in particular knows that, you know, it's not everybody I like. Or maybe he had me confused with Robert W. Gordon, who actually does like everybody.
Including you.
Including me, which is somewhat surprising, I guess, but I don't know. I like him, certainly. So I'll say something about spills. And I want to mention a couple of people who are absent here. One is Tom Heller. So Tom Heller, who's emeritus at Stanford Law School. Tom Heller and I are the two founders. I'm not the founder. And among my many flaws, and they are many, is I have virtually no administrative ability or even desire for administrative ability. And Tom Heller is just a whiz. So he was the one who managed to get the university to approve of it, the law school to approve of this, and to get a budget for it and so forth. There would be no spills without him. And he's since gone on to bigger and better things, but he was there at the founding. And so he was, I want to give him credit. I also want to mention, of course, someone that you all know, and that is Rogelio Perez Perdomo, who's not here, but I hope he's watching and listening in Caracas. And we promise not to say anything critical about the Maduro government, because they could come and arrest him immediately. So I won't say anything, but you know, he's been part of the Spills family. I don't remember how long, but for a very long time. And yeah, I do want to encourage people to say something about spills. I mean, the program this morning was supposed to be divided into two parts. The first part was talking about experiences and reminiscences of spills, and not of me. Although I'm very glad, and I hope we can make a few sales of my detective. They're really, I don't know whether many of you don't read such stuff because you're, you know, okay. I've written about popular culture. And one of my colleagues once said to me, how can you write about popular culture when you know nothing about it? You know nothing about sports, which is true. You know nothing about popular music, which is true. And I said, so why are you writing? You may know a little bit about detective stories, but that's about all. But that's one of the things that you're supposed to learn in law school. That is how to talk about subjects you know nothing about. In fact, that's the essence of legal education. But you know, we reject that. The Law and Society movement rejects that. But the other thing is that I wanted to say is that Spills, of course, has two features, which I think make it unique in American legal education. The first is it's truly international. And in fact, although it isn't, I think, formally true that we don't accept Americans, in fact, we don't. Oh, my goodness, is that something illegal? Did I just say something illegal?
We had one.
Yeah, I think there have been one or two, and there have been a couple of dual citizens that snuck in. And we also do recognize that Canada is a foreign country. Many people forget in the United States. So it's truly international. That's one aspect. And the other is that it's a law and society program, and then everybody has to do a SPILS dissertation, and it has to be empirical. We are not interested in the kind of stuff which appears in 200 law reviews, in which somebody expresses their view of what the Constitution of the United States really means, and ends up by suggesting normative things and so on. We aren't normative. I mean, we have values, and the values guide what people are interested in. And those are usually things that I think we'd all approve of. But the technique itself is never, or should never be, biased. And that's a secret of the law and society movement, that we probably impelled to be interested in issues like human trafficking, let's say. But we don't approach it from the standpoint, we know the answer, or we know what's right and wrong. Well, we do know what's right and wrong, but the actual work, the technique, and the essence of the work has to be, you're capable of being surprised. That is, you go into something, but you have to be able to be surprised at what you find. And it might be counterintuitive. It might lead you to question some of your premises, but you have to have that kind of mind. And that's so lacking in legal education. I mean, yeah. I was a little taken aback, Jonathan, when you talked about history of American law, the course I used to teach. And you made it sound like it was, very happy. And I think it was a happy experience, but looking at history sociologically is not happy making. I mean, we have so much, even though Ron DeSantis is not interested in it, we have so much to be ashamed of. But the US is not unique. I think every nation has a past that they have no reason to be proud of. And one of the great sins of nationalism is that it fosters a kind of pride in your history. And that's where internationalism comes in. I remember one of the first times I was ever in Mexico City, and I realized how the Mexicans looked at the Mexican-American War of 1848. I thought, oh my God, they don't like it. They lost a third of their country. I mean, and I went to school in the United States, and we learned there was a Mexican War, but nobody ever suggested that it was a war of aggression, that there was no reason to fight Mexico except that we were stronger than Mexico, and we got California. So how could that be bad? And I think that's what law and society coupled with internationalism. I think that's what it fosters. Not that I'm saying we should give California back, just Texas, but not California. Yeah, but I mean, I think it opens your eyes. I mean, I'm particularly interested in legal history, but the general law and society approach, I think, just fosters that kind of understanding. I mean, to that extent, it is biased. And to that extent, it is a little, dare I say it, left-leaning, because it just doesn't accept the kind of pious nationalistic platitudes, or even the pious anti-nationalistic platitudes that you find if you pick up almost any law review and start going through the sludgy page after page after page of stuff which is empirical without knowing that it's empirical, statements that have a footnote with 99 sources, but no real evidence of anything and so on. So we're, anyway, enough talking. I would like to encourage people here to talk about the SPILS experience. Or maybe it's something that you just best forget about. Okay, that's it.
I'm gonna go. Thanks to go out. So hi, Professor Friedman. I think it's been 15 years since my SPILS year, and I'm so happy to be back. And
Can you speak up, please?
oh, is it any better? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, I was listening to Manuel talking yesterday about Professor Friedman and about the SPILS experience, and I cannot trump that, nor some of the words that's been said before. But I wanted to say, as a lawyer, as someone who's been trained in this approach that Professor Friedman just mentioned, we learn to be careful with words and to set aside emotions and set aside biases and opinions, but at some point those matter as well. So let me start by saying that I'm deeply grateful for being a part of the SPILS family, and I'm so happy to be here. And this was the experience that truly transformed and changed my life. So good to be back. And I wanted to say that when I first came to Stanford back in 2007, I think, after that callback that Jonathan mentioned, I got that one from Manuel Gomez, by the way. So I still remember that day. When I first came to Stanford, I learned a few things from the incumbents. Well, what it's like, what to expect, big temperature changes over days. So this is why I brought my sweater today with me. What I did not expect was that once I land in Escondido village, there will be virtually nothing in my dorm, no utensils, no plates, no blankets. So after shivering under, I think, a tower or something for a night, me and a bunch of other SPILS students, we planned for a very adventurous trip to this exotic place called Walmart to grab some basic stuff. And we essentially bought utensils in bulk and then distributed among themselves to make it even cheaper. And during our first SPILS meeting, me and a friend of mine, I don't think he's here, but maybe he's online, called Rajat Rana. We shared with Professor Friedman that on this first day, because we had nothing and before we discovered Walmart, we found another place just around the corner that seemed suitable for, a quick shopping, and that place was called Stanford Shopping Center. And Rajat was saying, I could not believe how expensive basic things are. And you could see the horror in Professor Friedman's eyes, but because he is who he is, he did not criticize, and he did not really, he encouraged us to maybe think the process and make amends. And he said, I really don't think Stanford Shopping Center is the right place for students. No, it's not. It hasn't been. But the lesson there is that we, as a SPILS family, as a group, this program in so many ways taught us how to share and exchange and to make do and to persevere and to apply the spirit and the teachings and the experience in all sorts of settings. So when I decided to come back, encouraged by Manuel, again, many thanks for reaching out and essentially letting me know that there's an opportunity there. I came over just for 3 days, and Lufthansa did what they do best. They lost my luggage. So hopefully I can get it before I leave back for Poland. Still not here. But even though I only had what I had on my back, I wasn't really all that worried or scared because I knew I would survive. And more importantly, I also knew where to go to, make up for what Lufthansa did to me. I went to Stanford Shopping Center and grabbed some stuff. So not too shabby. Anyhow, I think the lesson there is I'm not an academic, but to me, it's truly amazing how much of that approach that Professor Friedman and the SPILS program fostered. I'm a convert in Jonathan's language, a convert to the Lions Society approach to law, and it's very relevant not just in academia, but even more so in legal practice. So when there are so many skills from empirical legal studies that you can easily transplant to how you think about clients and cases and contracts and drafting and having more pictures in the text because judges as people get bored with long texts, and that one font is maybe easier to read than another, and it just stays with you and makes it a part of who you are. So I'm very appreciative of that. Thank you for giving me a shot to be a part of this experience and for changing how I view the law, but also changing who I think I am as a lawyer and as a man. Thanks.
Well, my spills here, we were 22 fellows. I think must have been the largest.
Yeah.
And there was a reason for that. The school didn't have an LLM program. I understand there must have been pressure to expand. So 22 people who came to Stanford, probably half of it because they wanted to come to Stanford. They had no clue what SPILS was. They just wanted the Stanford degree. So it was an interesting mix of people who belonged in SPILS. I think I belonged nowhere, but anyway, but people belonged in SPILS and people were like corporate lawyers who wanted to stay corporate lawyers, and they didn't want to be bothered by this. And the seminar, the Law Society seminar, was very, very hard for half of the class at least, because it was on, I forgot, it was Tuesday or Monday from 7 to like 10 p.m. It was like 3 hours long. So one of the corporate lawyers in the group decided to split the readings, and he assigned roles and all that. So 2 people were supposed to read, nobody else was supposed to. So one was the presenter, the person who was going to raise their hand, and the other one was going to be the backup who's going to, and there was supposed to be an interaction between them to save the rest of the group. It worked for a week because Lawrence would ask other people and never the presenters. And he didn't know, I don't think you ever knew that we had that system, that corrupt system. But it was interesting because, if the reading was on Japan, obviously he was going to ask the Japanese, and we had four Japanese about their thoughts, but they were not assigned the reading. And they were looking at the people who were supposed to do the reading, save us. And Lawrence would say, no, not you. You're not Japanese. So on the Japanese example, he's talking about, it was about globalization. No, this is way before the Tuna Accord. Tuna Accord didn't exist yet. It was about globalization. And he says, take, for example, sushi. And then the Japanese smile because they think that sushi is Japanese, but what is it about sushi that is global? So he says, he went on with sushi. He likes sushi a lot. And then he says, the globalized aspect of sushi is the avocado in the sushi, which is very Californian and so on and so forth. And then the Japanese were in shock because, no, that's not sushi. So it evolved, the conversation was probably for about half an hour on what's in sushi and why is it global. Seems like a side conversation that doesn't belong in an academic seminar. But that was the end of the assigned readings. Then after that, everybody was curious. And I think it was not intellect, I don't want to, glorify the seminar because at the beginning it was not intellectual curiosity or being nerdy and having to read, or really reading everything voluntarily, but it was curiosity. So what then brought people to start reading and probably participating, not too much reading, but participating genuinely in class was curiosity. So that was really good. And then that kind of infected our social lives as SPILS fellows. There was always either a joke on something that had been said and then taken, differently, or just intellectual curiosity. And that was really interesting. And then it evolved somehow. And the seminar stayed the seminar for others to suffer.
But, yeah, it was, I don't remember the exact year, but it was Rogelio who suggested the idea of reflection papers, which kind of forces everybody to do the readings. And then the readings themselves have evolved over the years because we try to always put in something relatively recent so that people wouldn't think this is just old stuff. But I hope that that's something that you remember. For instance, Manuel mentioned the tuna court. Now, I think you're going to remember the tuna court the rest of your lives. I mean, even the fact that most of you said this is no court, and we were very critical of it. And Shasta County ranchers. So that actually, I think that this creation of a kind of core, and not that these necessarily are the core readings in Law and Society, but that there's something that you have in common that we use as jumping off points. I mean, there's some method in our madness that everyone knows what the tuna court is. Everybody knows the ranchers in Shasta County and others of the readings, the two Israeli settlements, an article written 1956, but still fundamental. And Yifat's article about newspaper coverage of the Israeli High Court. I mean, these are things that become part of a common core. I went to the University of Chicago at a time when it had an extraordinarily innovative curriculum, which of course could not last because it was much too good for the society. And the University of Chicago undergraduate department, there were no electives. I don't mean few, I mean zero. Everybody took the same courses. And let's say a course would be in literature. Everybody would be reading the same books. One of them was Emma by Jane Austen. So you knew that everybody in the school was reading Emma. And then, so it wasn't a statement that this was the greatest novel ever written, although I think has a claim possibly, but that it was part of a shared intellectual experience that everyone in the whole school was reading the same novel. And also, so it also had, there were different sections, but all the sections were reading Emma, and the exam at the end of the year was going to be an exam devised by all of the teachers, not particular to you. So that was something very unusual that couldn't last. But the idea of a core, I'm not saying that these are the most important, but the readings are divided to be illustrative of subjects and questions. And they're not statements that, well, this is something that you must read because it's somehow fundamental. Then, in fact, it might be something deeply flawed. I mean, the criticism of the tuna court was very vigorous every year. Why is he calling this a court? They don't call it a court. What is it? And why is it successful? And is it right that Feldman says this is a refutation of a fundamental principle in the law and society movement? Or maybe it isn't. And so it's that common experience which is part of the SPILS curriculum, and for the seminar anyway. But then the seminar is just, of course, it's the part I know the best, but there's the rest of it, which people like Manuel, Mariana, Itai, and so on that they know very well. The development through the year of a project, and that's really the heart of it. But so we think of the seminar as sort of giving you the kind of mental approach, the basic ideology. We used to always say, kind of not as a joke really, that it's a brainwashing course. And brainwashing, of course, is bad, but it contains two elements: brain, which is this thing, and washing, which means clearing out the dirt. And so it is brainwashing. It's designed to be clear all the kind of formalist, and the people who enter SPILS fall into two basic categories. I mean, they fall into many categories, but some of them are people that have come, they already know that they want to be law and society people. Maybe they don't know how, but that's why they chose the program. And then there are others who really don't know. I mean, they know, well, Stanford's supposed to be really good. Maybe they've heard good things about the SPILS program. But their minds have been warped by formal legal education. And it's not that the United States is so much better. It's not. I mean, legal education here is basically formalistic and doctrinal. And most of my colleagues, if you ask them, they would deny that, but they're not telling the truth. Or maybe they don't even know the truth. And if there is some, law and society, it's kind of an add-on. Oh, we'll say something. It's just like anything international. They'll say, oh, yeah, well, we do international. The last day of class, we say, oh, yeah, there are other countries in the world. Yeah. But so we do brainwash, and it's deliberate. And we hope that you come out with a clean brain afterward. And that prepares you for what the teaching fellows will guide you through during the year. And also we've had, maybe the next session will go into this, the kind of projects we've had. It's been amazing. The work that people have done, what they find possible to do in a very short time, and with some big obstacles. One obstacle is the obstacle of distance and money, because if you're going to do empirical work on Bolivia, you probably have to go to Bolivia over the spring, or over the winter break, and do your interviewing and so forth and so on. And it's very difficult, but they manage. And we have had almost no failures in 25 years. Almost no cases of people who didn't finish or couldn't finish. We've had few, let's not. I mean, but overwhelmingly, people pull themselves together and do it. Anyway, so I'm hoping that a few more people will at least talk about what the classroom experience has been like. At least I'm glad we seem to have gotten off the topic of Lawrence M. Friedman
So
for a while.
can I make a very brief, 'cause I don't want to take people's time, but I would like to shift from Lawrence M. Friedman to Manuel Gomez for just a moment, because he spoke. There's about a half a dozen people here who I know very well, who are my students, and I could speak at length about each of you, and I'm happy to do it, but I'm going to talk about Manuel Gomez, who just spoke. So I believe it was in, what year did you go to SPILS, Manuel? 2001. So in 2000, Manuel Gomez came to see me. And we had a conversation at the Gould Center in the little lobby there. And he told me what he was interested in. And he said, do you think I should come to SPILS? And I was being very selfish because he was really interested in conflict resolution stuff that I was interested in. So I said, absolutely. That one word was the greatest achievement I've made in furthering Lawrence Friedman's legacy. Because as you know, Manuel Gomez has been such an incredible student of Lawrence, but professor and carrying on the Lawrence Society work and the international work. And one thing I want to say about Manuel that highlights what Lawrence was just saying, and I was his thesis advisor, and it shows Manuel's agility and his real alignment with the way of thinking that we've been discussing. He came in with a question and realized halfway through it was the wrong question and changed everything. So his original question was, why is nobody doing mediation in Venezuela? Because they set up this business mediation center, nobody's going. And halfway through, he realized, I'm asking the wrong question entirely, because no one's using the center. That doesn't mean they're not doing mediation. And in fact, he started to figure out, he learned because he was empirical and he looked around and asked questions, that there was a whole other system going on that was fascinating that he didn't know about, and he wrote about it. So I think it's a great example of the flexibility and the kind of work, the discoveries that people make in the process.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope I have voice. I lost it yesterday in the AC. So in my year, we were 12 students. I thought this was the case always. And my mom, who still doesn't understand what I do, used to say that it's like the 12 apostles. They come from all over the world and they learn about this thing. And I'm lucky to have here Varsha and Itai, who were in my year. And it's not because you guys are here, but I really loved reading your reflection papers every time we were before going to class. And if I had to describe my SPILS year in one word, that would be uncomfortable. And it was uncomfortable because I came in with ideas of what I wanted to say and thinking I had the answers. And actually talking to Professor Gordon, who was my advisor, and the SPIL seminar, I just realized, probably just like Manuel, I had the wrong questions and I had the wrong answers, and I had to change. I didn't know anything about Lawrence Society before coming here. And it was not brainwashing, but more like brain reshaping, and it hurt. It's like going to the gym and seeing your muscles stretch. So that year for me was intellectually uncomfortable in the best sense. And 10 years later, I'm just really happy to be here. And I was just talking to Leo about his research. And because my brain is now retrained, I could just value, I was so fascinated to know what you're researching in China and how you can actually ask questions about legal systems and how they work and come in with this new perspective, as opposed to formalism and the doctrines we all came in. So yeah, that was my experience, and it was a hard one, but definitely one of the best in my professional life.
Yeah, sure, why not? Hi, so I'm, like Laura said, I'm class of 2013, 10 years ago. And I guess for me, the experience was really that of a community, and it was in a very annoying sense for the other LLMs. We had LLMs when we came in, and I think there were 4 other LLM programs, and those guys always saw us and went like, "You SPILS guys, you're always doing something on your own." And we would always do something on our own. We would always meet every week. We would have lunch at some place, one of our places, or we would meet every, I think, Thursday or Friday, and we would go to dinner, and we were kind of close. And I think it was because of what Lara said, like we were all going through an experience where we were in some sort of a mid-brainwash, maybe, and so we could only understand each other. We knew we were being super nerdy. I think we nerded it out royally that year, and we had to, because we had a year-long thesis that we had to finish. So the other LLMs again were like, "You guys, you SPILS guys, you have this huge thesis to do with the coursework that we're all supposed to do." And so we sort of ended up looking a little super nerdy. And today I was walking up to this room, and I met the LLMs from 2013 having breakfast after having had a run. And they said, "Come join us. We're just getting breakfast, and then we thought we'd go walk around." And I said, no, I have this thing with the SPILS crew." And and they were like, what is this? And I said, we're talking about SPILS in the law and society approach, and how SPILS changed our lives. And they all looked at me and they were like, "You SPILS guys, you're still at this." But I think we wanted to be in that room. We wanted to be in that living room of Professor Friedman's, which is just what I go back to every time I want to go back to the basics. I go back to that living room, and I think about our discussions, and it's very difficult to express what that means. But I think, developed some tests over the years, and sort of one of the tests was when I was actually going from one class to Professor Friedman's class, which was the history of American law that time. And the previous class had leftover brownies, and I'm a huge brownie fan. I love brownies. So you can't, like, nothing else tops it. So I had this bunch of brownies, and the professor just looked at me. He knew I wanted it, and he said, "Take all of this and do whatever you want with it." And the next class was Professor Friedman's class. I went in, but I knew I would be just looking at the brownies the whole time. And I went in, and he was there, and I offered him some of the brownies, and I said, "Do you want any?" And he looked at me. This was 10 years ago, right? So he looked at me and he said, "Varsha, you're offering me brownies at this age. What do you think happens when I eat this? Do you think my wife is going to be happy if I eat this?" And I felt so bad that I offered him these. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And then I took these boxes, and I was just looking at them the whole time because I knew I would eat all of them. And he started his class, and I forgot about the brownies the entire class, because it was so, you get into a world with Professor Friedman, and I know it's not about you, it's about SPILS and all of that, but it's also about you. There is a world that you create around you, which we are so happy to be part of. And I feel so happy to be part of that. And well, at the end of the class, I didn't even realize the brownies were there. And then Professor Friedman comes to me and he says, "So where are those brownies? Can I have one?" And he remembered. So I guess we were more interested in your class than you were.
So Lara was mentioned the spills as a religious experience, right? So I had to talk about my first conversion, right? Because spills was my first conversion. I had a second conversion later, right? That I became a Muslim, right, to marry my wife, who is Iranian. But my first conversion was moving from an attorney in Mexico to a spills fellow. And I think what Lara was saying really resonates with my experience, right? It hurt in so many ways, right? Even though that I was a rather young attorney, but absorbing and try to change your vision of the world, of the legal world, to a law society had that process, right? That process of letting go all these assumptions that you have about what is a court, or where is the law on this, and really right now reflecting on this, it's that shared experience that we had, maybe going through the same readings, going through the same method, going through the same discussions that have made this community so strong. But I think it wouldn't be strong without mentioning the big role that Jonathan has played on this. And I just want to mention that because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't because of obviously Lawrence, but Jonathan, and the great effort that he has made in building this community, right? Because first and foremost, yeah, we are a group and we know each other, and the generations come and then we still connect in different ways. And the devotion that Jonathan Greenberg has put to build that community, it's second to none. So also just wanted to say that to Jonathan. And the other thing is, I want to say that I recently had a student who was from Saudi Arabia, and he told me this story about the camel court. And I want to write that. So it turns out that there is a big market in Saudi Arabia about camels, right? That they go for high prices, millions of dollars, right? That for you people in the Bay Area is nothing, but for people outside of the Bay Area, that is a lot of money, right? For a camel. And it seems like the camel court started as a way of really laundering money. Right. So basically, the camels were not supposed to be this, expensive, but people will sell camels in Saudi Arabia. But then, once the prices go up, then disputes started going out. Right. So I want to invite anybody to join me in the project of writing about the camel court. Maybe Benjamin.
Not on my passport.
Exactly.
I have a message that we received over Zoom. So I'm going to read it if this, I'll just take this with me. All right. Yeah, it's a message from Amulia Poroshottama. She was a SPILS fellow, I believe 4 years ago. She's here, right? 2018, 19. Yeah, I think I was the teaching fellow then. Yeah. Right. So I'm going to read the message. I think, Lawrence, it includes things you want to hear and things that will be about you as well. A bit. So. It has been 4 years now since I graduated from SPILS program. It was the most intense year of my life. Going into it, I did not even know what I did not know. And at the end of the year, I had learned far more than I had expected. I learned empirical methods from Professor Hensler and Itai and realized that just how far behind Indian scholarship was in terms of methodological rigor and how far I had to go. But the really humbling and difficult job was figuring out the Law and Society seminar class that Professor Friedman and Professor Perdomo taught. I had no idea how Israeli kibbutzes or Japanese fish markets worked, let alone what we could learn about the law from there. What can you find out by looking through post office records in East Germany? What does the economy of South China have to do with turning lawyers into firefighters? It was the first time that I learned just how contingency and choice was involved in how legal systems in different parts of the world worked. My world opened up. We talk about decolonizing, diversifying the academy by teaching about the world outside of the global north. The Law and Society seminar was the first time I saw a truly diverse curriculum. Even within the other law school courses, people often looked at me as if I had grown a third head if I talked about events, perspective from outside of America. I felt at home within the SPILS cohort because the seminar was designed to get us to appreciate diversity. Our cohort did not always get along. There were many instances, I can attest to this. There were many instances where seminar discussions got heated. We also criticized Professor Friedman for his statements on the appeal of American culture and Coca-Cola in his Era One article. But he reacted with grace and curiosity, which was so refreshing in an environment where one was constantly worried about being wrong. And I knew that it was acceptable to be honest about my opinions when after realizing his book that year, he asked me what I thought because you're harsh and I'm keen to hear what you think. Within families, we disagree and we fight when fighting is necessary, and we still have affection for each other. And he did treat us with affection even when we did not see it. He modeled for us what it meant to be someone who is truly liberal. Thank you, Professor Friedman, you humble me. Thank you, Amulia. I will continue if I can start. So I'll be brief and I'll do a combination, I think, as well, because I do have to share one story that relates to Florence directly. But first, so what I felt about SPILS and the Law and Society. So I'm also a product of a very kind of formalistic legal education. The Israeli teaching, at least when I taught, was very what you would expect from law school to look like. And I remember myself often bored, often puzzled to see if there are many other ways to think about this, but I never knew how it can be done. And I remember I was doing a seminar in my fourth year about in contract law, and I was analyzing movies with contracts. And I remember everyone looked at me like I'm crazy. This is contracts. What are you doing about studying movies about contracts? I said, I really like movies. I can't like contracts less, but I can handle it. And I did it and I got support and it was nice, but I was unable to identify what exactly, where do I belong in terms of my thinking? And I was writing literature review and submitted the paper. It was all, many years has passed. Time has passed, I became a lawyer, I was practicing, I always knew I want to come study and become an academic. And then I submitted my SPILS application, again with a project related to popular culture. I said, that's something I really like doing. I think it's interesting. It needs to be explored more. No one will take it. So it wasn't the case, but I got in here with Gilad, who is now my wife, and that relates to my personal story as well. And the minute I stepped in Lawrence's seminar, I felt like home. It really relates to what Amelia was saying. I felt there is a place that can help me wrap around the way I think the law should be understood. And it helped me really formalize, although it's interesting because it's not formalizing in the purest sense. It helped me formalize my thinking about how I want to study the law, how I would like to understand the law. And most of it was new to me when I just started reading these articles and understanding the Law and Society movement as a movement. And that was, I know it's a word used often, maybe too often, but it was truly transformative for me in terms of understanding who I am as a person and as a scholar as well. At some point, I remember I don't remember. I think I went to visit Israel like in the summer of the SPILS year, and I found my old paper from law school about the contracts and the law. And then I saw that in my literature review, Lawrence Friedman was one of, and I didn't make the connections then, that Lawrence Friedman was one of the authors I cited the most. He has a Yale Law Journal article about law and popular culture. And I then noticed that that's the same Lawrence Friedman I actually had a full year with. And everything like just clicked immediately. So it felt to me that that's really the place I belong. And I'm since, a lot has changed. And I really, I'm really happy. I chose to come here, and the place chose me to come here as well. So all combined. I also had a lot of positive personal experiences here. I came together with my partner Dan. We got married while here. 2 of our kids were born here. And after our first child was born, I discovered a new line of conversation with Lawrence, which is diapers. And remember, he asked me, so do you change diapers? I said, yes, I change diapers quite a bit. He told me, how many diapers I changed in my life? I said, yes, I know. We talked about it a bit. And then he told me, it's so interesting. You have no problems changing diapers to your own child, but when you have to change someone else's, that's unheard of. So, okay, that's interesting. And then my kids were at the CCSC here at Stanford. As you know, it's a kind of co-op, so parents participate. And I remember one morning I was doing my shift, like 2 hours shift, and one of the teachers asked me to change diaper to one of the kids. And I took this kid and said, okay, Lawrence, you're just, and penetrated my head at this moment exactly. And I put that child over there and I took off his diaper and I agreed with him completely. So that's how important Lawrence is in my life. In many ways.
It was empirical, right?
Yeah, exactly. Empirical proof. Thank you.
I had that experience. Yeah. Right.
They were ready to shift to the other one, right?
Right.
About time?
No.
Stanford.
Do you want to do it?
Can I make the
Break?
Are there any other spills?
From Lawrence, sorry.
Oh, good.
This is about the diapers. That was, I had that experience because I changed diapers for my own daughters. But then we had a neighbor, and when I had exactly that, that's why I said it. And I had to change diapers of that baby. And I just was so filled with disgust.
I relate.
I know, why is this happening? I've done this 100 times, but I don't know, maybe there's in the psychological literature, or the child raising literature, there's something about this.
Some biological
explanation. A biological explanation, perhaps, but it is true. So that's what you got out of the SPILS year. Well, but it's, empiricism. And I was very glad, I do like the fact that people have mentioned, and I have the tuna court, Shasta County. How about Dr. Diablo?
Yeah.
That these are become part of not a canon so much as I said, that it's a shared experience, and each of these readings comes to mean something, some idea and so forth that you have. And but I think actually general legal education is incorrigible, though. The Law and Society movement began about 50 years ago, and it was started by sociologists. In fact, Richard Schwartz, who wrote the classic article, it was part of his dissertation on the 2 Israeli settlements. He was one of the founders. It was founded by sociologists, had nothing to do with there's a literature which is completely wrong about the history of the Law and Society movement, which tries to connect it with legal realism and other strains within legal education. It's not true. It's just simply not true. It started outside of the legal academy in sociology. And then a couple of years later, it became, an association. And the Law and Society Association was founded and began holding annual meetings. And in the early years, approximately 1/3 of the members were law professors, and 2/3 sociologists, political scientists, even believe it or not, an economist or two, people with psychology and so on. And I don't know, they don't seem to have figures anymore, but I think now I wouldn't say law professors are the majority, but there are many, many more of them in the Law and Society Association. The other thing about the Law and Society Association is also unique in another regard. It's international. I mean, there's a Japanese Law and Society Association, there's association in England and so on. But the Law and Society Association, of course, it's American. Maybe this is part of the problem with the world, but it's dominated by Americans. Most of the officials and so on have been American, but at least a third of the members now are from outside the US. And the meetings are extraordinarily international. If you look at the Law and Society Review, it'll be interesting, maybe someone has done this. If you look at the early issues, they're only about the United States. But in the last few years, if you look at the table of contents, I think half or more of the articles are about non-US matters. And this is on the whole really good, although there is the problem of international communication. I mean, the Japanese Law and Society Association is very large, but the vast majority of its members write only in Japanese. And the sad fact is that the rest of us can't read it. It's been an interesting, this is one of the subjects that I'm very interested in is, quotes, globalization, or my word that I use too much, probably convergence, which people like Feldman disagree on this, but I'm sure, I think SPILS is an example of convergence. We take people from all over the world, but when they come here, they're already half prepared, even if they're not prepared for the Law and Society approach. It's not like someone came here and what's a computer? What's an automobile? And the thing that I say probably too much is, because I'm Mr. Convergence, is that people go to Japan and they come back and they say, it's so different there. When what they really mean is it's 90% the same. But what we notice is the 10%. Once they land at the airport, it's like any other airport. They get in a taxi cab. The buildings look mostly the same. I mean, there are a few that are different. The food, yes, there's sushi, but they know sushi from here. Tom Hiller once said that within, I think, a 5-mile radius of Stanford, there were 26 restaurants that served sushi. You go into the Safeway and there's sushi. And in Japan, if you're in Tokyo, and I suppose most other cities, do you want Italian food? You want Korean food? You want Hungarian food? You can have it. So I think that this is a really important phenomenon. And SPILS is in its own way, is an example of this. Everybody has to speak English, which is maybe imperialistic, and it's a historical accident in some ways, but it's a necessity. I give this example, so you'll all find it familiar, that at an international airport, the air traffic controllers have to speak English, because otherwise all the planes would crash. I mean, there you are at the airport in Buenos Aires, and here comes the Turkish airliner. And if they start talking in Turkish, this plane is going to crash. And similarly, when a Spanish airline flies into Istanbul airport, they can't talk Spanish on the phone. So there has to be an international language. And for historical and other reasons, political reasons, it turns out to be English. And this is, when Shakespeare's day, English was not even spoken by most people in the British Isles.
Mhm.
It was a minor language of Europe, but through a long historical process, it became universal. Well, and sushi is now universal. Now, although, as I said, someone mentioned Coca-Cola. It's an interesting point. Everybody loves Coca-Cola all over the world. In fact, it's in, I mean, it's hard to find a country without Coca-Cola, but then there's root beer. And I think, I'm willing to sell this to the US government as a way of finding out who's a spy, because I have met maybe one or two people in my lifetime who were not born in the United States that thought they liked root beer. And I've asked people, what do you think of root beer? They say, well, it tastes like turpentine. I mean, what is this? How can you drink this? We love it, actually, and I think every culture, and maybe they retain at least one food nobody else can stand, except for the British. It's all of their food. And I would add Germany, but sorry, Gare. But yes, but then so globalization is complicated. Why do people why is pizza universal? Even in Italy, it's Southern Italian. It's not native to Milan or to Florence. What is it about pizza? Why do people like pizza? And so that's actually a law and society question. Well, or internet law and society question. Is it? So, I mean, these are the things that we hope you get out of the seminar and your experiences is it's convergence, because without it, the program would be impossible, modern life would be impossible. Yeah. So all developed countries and the developed segments of less developed countries, they share at least a technological culture. And the technological culture produces a general culture, and that again produces a legal culture. So that you can talk to a lawyer from Japan, and you can ask the lawyer, what does Japanese law say about the copyright of say software? And maybe they have a different answer. I don't even know what the answer is for us, but the question is the same. And that the answers are different, though not that different, but the questions are much the same all over the world. Now, this could change. Look at how the world has changed in, say, the last few hundred years. So now 300 years from now, this may all be different. We might have all fallen apart and the whole world is flooded and so forth and so on. I mean, I just finished writing an article, which probably one of the ones that would be least interesting to people here. It's probably the most parochial thing I've written in years, but it's about the rule against perpetuities. and it's about various ways in which the law has tried to accommodate people who in a way want to live forever, if not personally, although some of them do, then at least through devices that go beyond the grave. And, so this is, if I talked about the rule against perpetuity, it would take 3 hours and you still wouldn't like it. But this is a rule which limited the length of time that the dead hand can rule after death. And about half the states have gotten rid of it. And so it's theoretically possible in some states, including Delaware, to set up a trust that lasts forever. You can set up a trust that just never ends, goes from generation to generation. And I just find this an incredible notion. In Colorado, you can only set up a trust that lasts 1,000 years. So 1,000 years ago, think of what the world was like 1,000 years ago. And if you project forward 1,000 years, everything is going to be entirely different. And then maybe that all the things that we take for granted today just won't exist anymore. It'll be entirely new. But we won't be around, so why should we worry? When you're dead, you're dead. All right, I don't know. This is just one of the privileges of teaching being a professor, teaching a seminar, is that you are allowed to ramble. No one can say, would you please shut up already? Anyway, we've run over time.
I would like, before we take a break, forgive me because I don't have the privileges of professorship, but I'd like to say a couple very brief things about what I've heard in the last hour and a half. The first thing is, if you're not an American, the absolutely worst thing you could do is change another child's diapers while you're drinking root beer. But I want to say there's two themes that I've heard. The first, I would say, about the impact of spills. The first is, I would describe it as intellectual opening. I wouldn't use the word brainwashing. I think it's the doors opening and a path opening that everybody here has followed and taken the rest of their lives. And the second, Lawrence talks about convergence, but I would talk about that personally, which is friendship across borders and boundaries around the world. And that friendship, just like the intellectual path, is what Lawrence was talking about, a never-ending trust. That's the never-ending trust. And I want to thank Sergio so much for your kind words. I do believe that Lawrence, I observed many times in an environment that didn't always, as an institution, understand the importance of spills. Lawrence always did and treated spills like a kind of family, and we've all continued. And I mean it when I say family. For example, I was in Oaxaca for Sergio's wedding, and he describes a wedding with a Mexican Catholic person and a Persian Muslim person, and there was a Jewish rabbi. There was also a Japanese ring boy, my son. So there's a continuity of these friendships that will never end, and that we're all part of it, and that will continue. And I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Start our second panel of the day, because of spills, research, scholarship, and intellectual life. I will just briefly introduce our wonderful panelists, all alumni. And I'll just say briefly, I cannot put it better than it's already been said today, but this program really is a jewel of Stanford. We just so appreciate and admire all the wonderful people from all over the world who come through here, and are so grateful for them. And I won't say much more because I've already embarrassed this man more this year than he will allow, but I'll just say I love you dearly, Lawrence, and really it is to you that we owe this, although so many of you contributed so much. Okay, so let me briefly introduce our speakers who are going to tell us about the way that the program affected their intellectual and professional life and more. So Varsha, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your last name, Iyengar?
Yeah, Iyengar.
Iyengar, okay, is a SPILS graduate from 2013. She is a lawyer, mediator, and researcher working in business and human rights and dispute system design. In India, she worked as a founding partner of a law firm, Arca Law, where she specialized in dispute resolution and public interest law practice. She also taught at National Law School of India University, and she taught public interest lawyering and product liability. She's currently pursuing her SJD at American University, where she works on the remedial impact of accountability mechanisms within the World Bank and IFC. Our next speaker is Benedetta Faedi-Dorami, who is a professor of law at Golden Gate University Law School, where she teaches family law, international human rights, gender and children's issues in international law, law of armed conflict, international law, and property. Is there anything you don't teach there? A graduate of both the SPILS and JSD programs here at SLS, she's been the recipient of numerous awards for her extensive research and scholarship on gender-based violence. She is the author of several book chapters and articles on human rights, gender, and children's rights. Her book, Gender and Violence in Haiti, Women's Path from Victims to Agents, was published by Rutgers Press in 2014. And her book, International Perspectives and Empirical Findings on Child Participation, co-edited with Tali Gal, was published by Oxford in 2015. She's the editor with Tali Gal of the special issue, Empirical Findings on Child and Youth Participation in Developing Countries, Children and Youth Services Review. And she formerly served as a researcher for the Child Protection Unit of the UN Stabilization Mission in Haiti and worked in private practice in London. Luis Bergoya is a lecturer and teaching fellow for the International Economic Law, Business and Policy LLM program, and we are hugely grateful. He saved us. Thank you. Along with Maue. I don't know if Maue is here, but it's wonderful Maue too. And he is a JSD candidate. Luis's dissertation project builds on his award-winning JSM thesis, a taxonomy of ICSID cases involving party-appointed quantum experts, and relies on mixed methods to assess the overall conditions under which the taking of expert evidence constitutes an efficient practice. When does it work? When does it not work? Luis's project also assesses the reasons behind the ever-growing gap among party-appointed experts and the efficacy of bias mitigation mechanisms applied to experts and adjudicators. In his private practice, Luis represents major corporate clients, international investors, and sovereigns in litigation and arbitration disputes, and appears as an expert on foreign law before the courts and international arbitral tribunals. Before coming to Stanford, Luis participated in the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission Honors Program, was a visiting researcher at Georgetown University Law School, and clerked for an Arizona Superior Court judge. Last but not least, we have Yifat Holtzman-Gazit, who is a professor of law at the Chaim Strix Faculty of Law at the College of Management Academic Studies in Israel. She obtained her SPILS and JSD degree, no? No, just JSD? I didn't know that.
Really old.
Okay, we're gonna have the, okay. She obtained her JSD degree from Stanford Law in 1997 under the guidance of Professor Friedman. A decade later, she returned to SLS as a visiting professor. In 2014, she was named a senior Michigan Grotius Research Scholar at the University of Michigan Law School. She writes in the areas of the history of land expropriation in Israel, media coverage of Israel's Supreme Court. We just heard a bit about that from Lawrence earlier. Legal history of the Jewish National Fund and the urban forest. Her recent article in Hebrew, The Tragedy of Private Urban Forest, won a prize for the best article published in the Bar-Ilan University Law Review 2022. So with that, I welcome Varsha to start us off. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So I'm happy to be here, and I think our first session kind of said a lot of things that I wanted to say. So I'll keep it as short as possible. I have I know I have a little time, 5 to 10 minutes maybe. So when I was asked to speak here on the law and society and how it changed my life, and I realized it's a very difficult thing to explain. Mainly because sitting here 10 years afterwards, I'm sort of looking back at what law and society, what that approach did to me, and it all seems so obvious. It all seems like the law and society approach sort of told us things that were supposed to be obvious. Just look at the real things instead of the law in the books. Look at what happens in the real world. And it all seems very, very simple and obvious, but it wasn't when I started, because it's a huge process of unlearning. It isn't obvious to us lawyers who are taught to think another way. So it's a huge process of unlearning the old and learning the new. And so it's a difficult thing to explain. So I thought I'd sort of just go through 3 things that I did in the past 10 years and just reflect on those because that's when I consciously thought about the law and society approach. And so when I started my SPILS year, of course, like a lot of you, I read Shasta County and it blew me away. And I was just amazed at how a non-formal legal order could prevail. And then the same year, Manuel Gomez came and gave us a talk on a paper that he was working on, which is Burning Man, where he went into this desert and this community, and he wrote an amazing paper about it and gave an amazing talk. And again, I was so fascinated about doing something so anthropological. So as soon as I finished my SPILS year, I went back to India and I said, I want to do something like that. And I went into the forests in rural India, where there is a ritual that's practiced by a community, a tiny community in the hills of the Western Ghats in India. And I observed the ritual that they practice called the Kola, which is basically where a spirit is said to descend on a villager, who would then take the form of a demigod and perform a ritual throughout the night, where the villagers and the landowners would approach the spirit and obey any of its commands, and disputes would be resolved by the spirit. And this still is a practice that is followed today. I was fascinated and I went thrice. And then I realized this is super difficult. This is so tough to do research like this, which is anthropological and which requires you to be in the setting of the change. And that was sort of my first lesson on law and society, which is that compared to other approaches, which are doctrinal and formalistic, this is very difficult. It demands that you be in the real world. It demands that you go and observe and take lessons from what is happening rather than what you can make up and what you can write about. So I kind of almost have abandoned that project because it was really difficult. And I want to talk to you about another one that I did, which was because I realized it was very difficult to do something out that's anthropological and go out there in the real world. I decided, let me try something easier, which is sort of within the four walls, and I could do something there. And I chose to do a historical research which you can just sit and read about. So I did this paper on how the Indian Supreme Court has been reported by the newspapers in the first 10 years of it being established, the Supreme Court being established. How did people start to look at the Supreme Court, the Indian Supreme Court? And it was a really interesting paper because no one had done this back in India before this. And I had archives from major newspapers, and they had very interesting things to say. I won't bore you with the details of what it exactly said, but suffice to say that a lot of the landmark cases that we talk about in India have been reported within these 10 years. And I presented this paper I workshopped it in a conference that was organized by Oxford and Melbourne University. And the feedback on the paper was really interesting to me because I could just divide the room into the law and society folks and the constitutional law folks. Because the constitutional law folks started off this discussion with, how the separation of powers been argued, and where do we find the basic structure doctrine inside of these discussions. And there were these other set of people who were really interested in the other kinds of things that came out in the paper, where a part of the paper talked about a major hearing. And the way the paper reported it was that there was a sprinkling of women who were present amongst the audience. So a lot of the folks who were giving me feedback on the paper were interested in that line, which said that there were women in the room. And if you happen to look at the society at that time in India, it was rare for a woman to make time from household chores and come find their way into a court hearing. So if women had to be present in the room, then this was a big deal. And you could really make out who the law and society folks were in that room and who the constitutional law folks were. And the law and society people were really, really interested in the photograph that appeared in the newspaper where the judges were wearing the traditional attire underneath their English robes. And this was the stuff that I think the Law and Society approach really taught me to look at. It taught me to look at things that were not just paper. And one of the takeaways that I had from this was it's really useful for a Law and Society approach to start looking, to start with the people and not the paper. So, and I kind of remember always I go back to one of the classes where, again, the history of American law, where Professor Friedman always started out with, what would Caleb and Hepzibah do? And he always started off with this couple who were sitting by the fire and the fireplace crackling with fire. And then there's Caleb and Hepzibah who's sitting in 18th century America. And would this law matter to them, and how would it matter to them? And I always found that useful to start with the people. Another thing that I did back in India was because I worked in public interest petitions, I filed a case before the Karnataka High Court on behalf of children with visual disabilities, because they were not being given compatible books in compatible format, Braille books, and the material online was not compatible with the Braille format. So I filed a petition in the Karnataka High Court asking for the government to make books available to children with visual disabilities. It was a clear-cut enough case for the court to say, yes, we do need books for these children, so give them books. And it was straight enough order. Well, the case was filed in 2019, and we still don't have it completely implemented today, because in reality, the government finds it hard to implement it because of various reasons, like capacity issues. They don't even know how to convert it into Braille. They don't have enough people and experts who come to them and tell them how to do it. So a takeaway from this was sort of to really see and assess the role of the courts. And it's amazing that we had this order and it was a victory on paper, but we are still struggling to get it implemented and for it to be a reality for the children who actually file those cases, because the court is not this magical institution that just doles out orders and then everything magically changes. So again, I go back to one of the classes where we really did discuss what the law was supposed to do and what institutions are supposed to do, courts. And I remember Professor Friedman saying, giving us this metaphor of think about it like a bridge. You know, it isn't really the destination, but it's a way to change the status quo, and it may take you to that place, but you would have to go through a little bit for it to happen. So, well, the last thing that I sort of end with is what I'm doing presently, which is on looking at international financial institutions and looking at the complaint mechanisms that operate within those. And these are largely used by human rights advocates or environmental rights activists. And we're tending to notice a difference in how activists who have taken the environmental approach differ from the human rights based approach. And some of the climate change activists now want to adopt the human rights approach to fight their fight on loss and damage and those sort of things within the developing countries. And all of this sort of reminds me of the human rights culture that Professor Friedman has written about. And I think largely, more generally, a legal culture argument that we can see happening now, because I think Professor Friedman has written about legal culture, and a lot has been said afterwards on legal culture, and some of them have criticized it, saying it's sort of vague and it doesn't really say anything. And I think Professor Friedman also said that at some point. But I do see today the way we are looking at human rights culture and advocacy, I do feel that we need to look at the concept of legal culture more closely, and I do see a lot of resonance within that. And it makes a whole lot of sense to me today. And I think that's where I am right now. And I can see a re-interest in looking at legal culture and the human rights culture today. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes. So thank you so much for organizing this wonderful gathering, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. So every time that we do this, and I've come to many of those, it feels like coming home for a family reunion. And I would actually say that the best part of the SPILS family is that is a truly happy family, because it feels so much less complicated sometimes than the other family that I'm sure we all belong to. And so, prior to joining the SPILS program, I was a lawyer in London, and despite working for a great law firm, I wasn't a happy lawyer, and I kind of felt lost at some point. And, to join the SPILS program, when I was given the opportunity to join, and Manuel actually is the one that, gave me also that opportunity. I turned actually down at the same time the prospect to go to New York City and to China with my law firm. And so all my friends in London thought that I was crazy, like going back to be a student, to, turning down a great career in private practice. But the truth is, it was one of the best decisions of my life, and one that I've never regretted, not even when things have been difficult or when things have been challenging. And, my dissertation, my work here at Stanford was on gender-based violence in Haiti, and my scholarship since then has focused on women's rights and children's rights. I have written about violence against women and women's violence in different contexts beyond Haiti. So in the United States, in France, in the 17th century, I have discussed what prompted the Me Too movement in and outside the United States, and investigated the right of children to participate in decision-making processes affecting their lives, both in countries of the global North and countries of the global South. And, in the past 15 years, through my own scholarship and the scholarship of others, I hope I've come to grasp and appreciate what really Law and Society is about, that enterprise that is interested in law's place and influence in different aspects of real lives, and understands law to be simultaneously symbol, philosophy, and action. My dearest former advisor at Stanford, Deborah Rodi, once said, the vast majority of scholarship vanishes without apparent influence. Too much research is inconsequential and unintelligible, is presented in obscure and pompous prose, and is directed at too narrow an audience. And on the other hand, we know that historically the most influential political and social theorists, they actually wrote in a very clear and accessible language. Plato, Locke, Rousseau, Marx, Simone de Beauvoir are among the obvious examples. And among those, I would include also Professor Friedman, who taught us that good writing is clear writing, that good scholarship is accessible scholarship. And in other words, he really taught us, like no one else, the difficult art of keeping it simple. And, writing a clear and accessible scholarship ultimately means that as scholars, we are expected to clarify how our work informs and illuminates everyday life. In my own research, in my own little world, I have attempted to apply these lessons. For example, in the last few years, I've researched and written about child obesity. That is obviously one of the most serious current public health challenges. It affects over 124 million worldwide and 13.7 million only in the United States. And, there have been, there are alarming projections that have sparked widespread concern, but not much consensus on how to address the problem. And, you know, obesity has been mostly considered either a matter of personal responsibility or, in the case of children, a matter of parental responsibility. And I think that, and I've written about the fact that I think there is inadequate attention that has been given instead to the obligations borne by states to prevent and combat child obesity under international human rights law. And so what my work tried to do is, you know, remedy that gap in the current research by discussing basically a comprehensive child rights-based approach that imposes positive obligations on states to prevent child obesity through the realization of children's rights to adequate food, to health, and to participation. And the follow-up article expanded on the right of children to participate in decision-making processes affecting their lives under Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And so actually what my paper argued was that the implementation through experiential learning opportunities in food integrated into school curricula, such as gardening programs, cooking classes, tasting sessions, and all the empirical evidence basically deserves actually much attention and also some promises for effective solutions related to child obesity. So, you know, more recently, in an attempt to, I guess, make an impact, after many years of researching and working on children, trying to find ways to protect their rights and freedoms, I've actually recently decided to write for them. And so at the end of last month, my first children's picture book was published by an Italian publisher. And so I recently spent a week in Italy for the book tour, and the most rewarding, I have to say, and impactful experience by far has been actually presenting this book in schools and seeing, you know, children eager to share their own experiences about discrimination and microaggressions, which is what this book talks about, which is obviously the scholarship that I do. And, you know, all these experiences that they had that they actually challenged their daily lives. And so if I try and reflect on, because I thought about why am I actually doing this? How, after all these years writing about children, I've actually ended up writing a book for children. And I find that the right answer actually goes back to the Law and Society philosophy that I've learned here at Stanford during my SPILS and my JSD. So that school of thought that taught me that there are so many different ways, audiences and places to deliver law, including, in this case, a bedtime story and a group of children in their classroom. So thank you, Professor Friedman. And thank you all for being in such an amazing and inspiring community.
Well, thank you for inviting me last minute to fill in somebody's shoes. And I'm sure I'm going to fall short because here is such a brilliant group of researchers. And I have always thought of myself as someone who falls in the middle of the distribution curve. And I'm thankful to Professor Friedman and to the SPILS program for every once in a while opening a spot for someone who, at the time of applying to the program, was not such an accomplished candidate and such a brilliant and promising person to accept to the program. I was surprised earlier to hear that I'm not the only lucky person to have had a meeting with Professor Friedman before actually starting SPILS, which speaks highly of Professor Friedman's openness and willingness to engage with students even before the SPILS year starts. And that first conversation was a game changer for me because I came with a traditional normative schooling in law and civil law traditions and common law traditions. And I was coming here with what questions and with a willingness to write my opinions about legal problems that I thought were important to me. So from that very first week, I started to transition to what identifies us as members of this school of thought, people who are more interested in
how questions about processes, questions about impact, questions about under what conditions legal attempts are successful. And that's probably the key and the first step towards becoming a successful scholar in the Law Society School of Thought. I think there was a prompt for today. People have been talking about their research and their accomplishments. My research is still ongoing. Lawrence Friedman has made clear to me that he's not interested in my topics. So I'm not going to dwell in the technicalities of how lawyers and economists relate in international dispute resolution. I'm rather going to pick one of the other items in the prompt, which was scholarship and intellectual life. And if I start, I did prepare remarks for today, and I decided not to use them because I realized very quickly that if I read them, I was going to be dwelling in commonplaces and experiences that we all share. So I'm trying to improvise here and usurp the right to ramble that belongs to professorship, as Jonathan mentioned earlier. One of the greatest experiences I've had here derives from the fact that Professor Friedman, Professor Gordon told me that I was going to be very successful here. And I think I have been very successful here. Not only because I am here, but because I took advantage of the distinguishing factor of this program and this school, which is the empowering nature that being here and belonging in this program gives to people who before probably didn't enjoy or had access to an empowering experience. Somebody here told me very early on, go knock on people's doors, ask questions, make requests, try to become friends with people, pursue your projects, experiment. I see Bob Gordon here. I knocked on his door in the first quarter of my SPILS year. He warned me that SPILS was going to be a very complex year, that I was going to have a lot of work to accomplish to be able to finish the year and not be one of those failed students. But I did wanted to teach contracts, and I did wanted to see how a contract law class was at Stanford Law School. So I asked Bob Gordon to work with him in his contracts for LLM students, and he gave me that opportunity. And it was in probably my second quarter as a SPILS fellow that I started gaining one of the things that is more often overlooked, and is the teaching role that as researchers we also should have. And teaching here at Stanford has been a very important privilege for me from the very early days as Bob Gordon's TA, and then now as Alan Sykes' teaching fellow. To the teaching fellowship role, which I had during the COVID year alone with a tiny cohort, I must add that becoming a repeat player as a teaching fellow a year later, or after there was a hiatus year in which I didn't serve, now with Maui Law, I think this gives me an opportunity to say something that I think is inscribed in the purpose of this gathering today, the intellectual conversation and the ability of us researchers to make an impact in students' life. And I remember one of my earlier conversations with Sergio Quick before coming here. I think I'm going to quote you roughly. Sergio, you said the SPILS program is the anti-LLM. And it's a good way to put it. As a teaching fellow for LLM students, having acquired the SPILS training before carrying out this role, I think it has been a very important and very enriching experience for both Maui and I. But I think it's also a very important experience for students in the LLM program who come with this I want to be a international economic law type of lawyer mindset, to expose them in a way to the law and society approach to doing research and analyzing complex international law problems that are not necessarily the ones that you see often published in the Law and Society Review. And those students who are the anti-spills students benefit from that and are eager to hear about our approach and our interest in looking at problems from the empirical angle. So teaching has been very rewarding personally, but I think it has been to the extent that people from our program get an opportunity to engage with other students in the graduate programs, very enriching for them as well. We're going to fail miserably throughout the rest of the day to avoid mentioning you and honoring you.
Okay.
But I'll try to.
Go ahead.
I'll try to live up to your plea and say I wrote a note in your book that I would like to paraphrase my own note. I don't have my notes here. I think some of the most valuable moments I've had in this school are the moments that I've spent with you. And those moments, of course, as time goes by, are less and less. And it is through your work that I find some sort of undepletable source of moments with you. And I've heard you many times say how important it is to distinguish between the individual and the individual's work. Two different things. But in reading your work, in adopting the frameworks that you provide in your works, I think we all have a very unique opportunity to keep having and amassing these moments with you that are so pleasant and so enriching. There's also another important point I want to make, and it's about the network that we create here and the intellectual moments that we can have thanks to that network. As we grow older, we are not necessarily looking for new friendships, and time is limited, and we have commitments and families that take most of our other time. If I look at my recent interactions with individuals over the last 6 months outside my family, those interactions are with people that are in this room or that are watching us through the streaming channel. And those are the moments that I enjoy and cherish the most, because those are the moments that make me happy. Those are the conversations that make me happy, that bring a sense of fulfillment to my life. And for that, thank you. And thanks to the environment and the community that has been able to foster this network that allows us to go on. Thank you.
Okay, so I was asking to speak the last because I'm the pre-spill program. I was here before the spills. So I have nothing to say about the spills since I don't know the spills program. I came in as individual in '92. I was corresponding with Lawrence, and all my comments, Lawrence, will be how Lawrence influenced my life, not spills, because I'm not a spills graduate. I corresponded with Lawrence first by emails, asking him whether will he agree to be my advisor. He said something like, Lawrence, come and see. And I came, and I was here pretty much alone. There was another student, Neil Nathanael was here, and I think a Canadian guy and the guy from Switzerland, and that was it. And each one of us had his advisor, and we were kind of, checking on one another, but with no program. So I do want to say what I took on what I take from Lawrence even today. First thing Lawrence taught me, write about what you know. And it's a huge
I mean, it's an amazing advice that took me a year to realize how important it is. In fact, before coming here, I was reflecting with my husband about the first year being here at Stanford, and he said, "Do you remember that you cried the first year all time?" I said, "Yes, I do remember," because whenever I came to Lawrence, he said, "No, think about something else," but politely, of course, and nicely. But whenever I came with an idea to research American law, okay, maybe think about something else. And I was so desperate. I couldn't figure out what I need to do. And I really relate to some of the experiences you mentioned before about reshaping your mind. It's really 1 year of crying. It took me to reshape my mind and come with a subject that Lawrence said, okay, this is it, land expropriation in Israel. And it was really difficult for me to come all the way to Stanford to write about Israel. And this was a great advice to write about Israel, and an advice that I take with me in my scholarship, and also giving to students that I'm supervising. So if I look at my scholarship, all of it dealt with Israel, and it's quite amazing. I wrote the thesis about land expropriation in Israel. Then Lawrence gave me the amazing advice to make it a book, which was a great advice. Thank you, Lawrence. And then I wrote about the Jewish National Fund, which is an Israeli institution dealing with land. And of course, I did historical research, and it was one of the most difficult things to do, historical research. And I realized that it will take me so long to do a lot of history, and how Lawrence does it, it's amazing, so fast. And then I took Lawrence's advice, and I remember he taught me, don't look at Supreme Court, look what there is below. So I wrote about district court in Israel and how they deal with land expropriation without looking at the Supreme Court. And then I wrote this paper that I really appreciate that you included in the syllabus about coverage of Israel's Supreme Court. There it was, but looking at the newspapers. And even now, my research about trees is dealing with people and in Israel. So write about what you know is an advice that I took with me everywhere and throughout my scholarship. Second advice that I got from Lawrence, and I recall it each time that I'm stuck: stop reading, start writing. Right? I was remembering, I don't know how it's today. I had like a cubicle in Green Library, like something without windows, like I had this. And each time I was checking out books and I was going with them in my hands. And once in a while, Lawrence was meeting me or whatever, showing me, and he say, once again, you are reading, stop reading, start writing, and write simple, which is also an advice that I find it useful today because it's easier to read, it's much harder to write. A third advice that I took from Lawrence that accompanied me is to listen to what people have to say, either when you are doing a research, but also as a student. I recently supervised a thesis by a Bedouin student, and I was sitting and listening what the guy wanted to say about the Bedouin law, and I was really feeling that I take the ability to put myself aside and just listen to what this student wants to say. And Lawrence is a great listener. Thank you. Another lesson I took from Lawrence is to be a mensch. I don't know how to say mensch in English.
Mensch.
A mensch, okay. So to be a mensch, I recall I think it was when I came as a visiting professor. I think Lawrence had an accident. You recall? You passed the cross, and someone just, it wasn't nice.
Someone who wasn't accepted into SPILS just.
Right. And he just crossed the road here in campus, and someone just hit him. And first of all, I think before Zoom, they came and did recorded the classes. But I recall Lawrence said, I will not go for blood compensation. I will not go for blood money. meaning I will not ask money more than the insurance is. And I was really touched about it because he could. And he said, no, this guy has nothing. Whatever the insurance will give, that's fine. I will not go after blood money to take more. And I think it's something to say about the person. I also took an advice, a lesson for life, to be humble. Lawrence, I don't have to say, but he's very humble. And the last thing that I not succeeded to take an advice is to walk as an ant. You know, Lawrence is in love with ants. He thinks that this is the amazing creature on earth. He has books on ants. He knows all the species of ants. And he is very diligent, as ants are, which I probably need to be more. But this is an advice I might walk in the future. So thank you, Lawrence, for all the lessons you taught me. And I feel that you are with me in my personal and intellectual life every time, every day, I would say. Thank you.
I think we have a few minutes if people have questions, comments.
I do. So I'll just make a few remarks. First of all, thank all of you. You're very kind. You've said things. Maybe I deserve a few of them, but I don't know. You know, I'm very empirical minded. So at least two people have talked about the fact that before they were in SPILS, they came and they talked to me. Otherwise, I remember nothing of these conversations, and that persuaded them to apply to SPILS. But of course, we don't have anybody here who came and talked to me, and afterward they decided not to apply. There might be dozens, or who decided to apply and we just turned them down. That's another possibility. So that's comment number one. Comment number two has to do with ants. So ants have no brains. Yeah. Maybe that's why I'm interested in them. But you know, they do an experiment where they take ants have instinct to follow other ants. So if they arrange so that the ants are in a circle, they keep going until they drop dead. And no ant ever said, "This is crazy. Why are we doing this?" So I'm fascinated by ants, but I don't model myself after ants. I hope. Anyway, I want to thank you all for your comments, and I think it is true that being exposed to the Law and Society approach is important. It's transformative. I don't know. I think it happened to me really mostly at the University of Wisconsin under the direction of Willard Hurst, who was a legal historian, but it was really Law and Society too. Bob also comes from that background, and it is a way of opening your mind, and I'm very grateful that it happened to me, because once you're exposed to it, it's really hard to ever go back. Now, but I do want to say, that an element of realism. So we've had all these SPILS students, and I remember one in particular. I won't mention his name or his country. I was very fond of this guy. We were good friends, and he's had an academic career, and I've seen some of his work. Not an inkling of Law and Society. Absolutely nothing. It's straight doctrinal and so on. And he's made a career out of it. I thought, where did we fail? Something, people say with regard to a lot of religion. Where did we fail? Somehow he never absorbed it. But the people in this room, you all did absorb it. And I think you've done wonderful things, many of you, most of you, all of you have done it, or are about to, or could. or want to. Okay, that's all.
Other comments, questions, thoughts? I'll ask a question if I can, and that's of Lawrence, but really anybody. I was struck by your statement in the first panel that, you know, teaching remains very much doctrinal, and that, you know, if you spoke to many of your colleagues, they would deny that, but they're either in denial or lying. At the same time, right, if you look at research and in part just the influx of people with PhD training in all of these allied fields, I mean, tell me if you agree, right? I think one could frame it as a great success of the Law and Society movement. A lot of the research is empirically grounded. So A, is that true? And B, what then explains the mismatch between what you're seeing in the classroom and the nature of the scholarship that's being produced?
Okay, yeah. So I'll go back to when I was at the University of Wisconsin Law School, and I was doing a project on the history of trust law. And the sources led me to Boston. And so I told Willard Hurst that I was going to Boston. And he said, oh, I'll write a letter, you must talk to Austin Wakeman Scott. Now, so Austin Scott was a professor at Harvard. He was the panjandrum of trust law. And he was the author of a multi-volume treatise on trusts and a casebook, which were the absolute last word in formalistic blah blah. There wasn't anything in there, but at any rate, he was the worst of the worst. And I thought, oh my God, why would I ever talk to this guy? But of course, anything Willard Hurst says, I'll do it. So I went to see Austin Wakeman Scott, and I talked to him, and I was amazed at his insights and what he understood about the real world of trust law and its history and what explains things. And then I came to realize something. He obviously thought this is not what law is about. This is just war stories or things I know. He just thought, this is not what you're supposed to do. And that's happened over and over again, that people come into legal education and I think their role is to teach doctrine. And when I went to the University of Chicago Law School, and I never took the course in criminal law because a teacher whose name was Puttkammer, which was a bad name anyway, but he was terrible. And some of the students say, you just have to go and you've got to sit in once. So I did, and it was unbelievably boring, mindless, and irrelevant. I thought, oh my God, criminal law. And this is what he thinks is criminal law. You know, to this day, zillion years later, I can remember some of what he said droning on about it. And then much later, I found out that this guy had been a criminal lawyer who was involved in some of the most dramatic, sensational cases in the Chicago area, but obviously thought not a word of it is fit for the ears and minds of students. So, okay, yes, an awful lot has changed, but a lot of the people who are publishing articles using statistics and so forth, it's not in there. They don't bring that into the classroom because it's not really law. Or they bring a little of it. I'm not going to say that nothing has changed. A lot has changed. And it's a lot better than it used to be. Really a lot better. I had a property law course in law school. I went to the University of Chicago, which, of course, at the University of Chicago thinks everything they do is the greatest in the world. And occasionally they're right. But we had a course in property law, which kind of stopped in the 17th century. And not a word was said in the course about modern land law or public lands or any of any topic, real topics about the real estate system, which is an amazingly important system. And when I was an actual real life lawyer, which you may not believe, but I was for a while, we did trust and estates work. And the case books, when I came to teach it, I rejected all the case books because the leading case book, which was edited by 2 Harvard professors, said there's nothing very analytically interesting about this subject. I thought, what? The entire wealth in a society turns over every generation or so. And this is not analytically interesting. What on earth does that mean? And the case books would have cases. There was one case that was in all the case books about two immigrants who didn't know English, and they had a man and wife, and they executed each other's will. Oh my God, is that valid? Well, of course, no, it isn't. But I thought, well, how often is this going to happen? And yet the things that were what I remembered from my own practice were everyday issues were never mentioned. So I think there's still a lot of that going on. Now, I mean, I can't really sure about this because I don't eavesdrop on my colleagues. I don't even watch them with Zoom. And it may be that I'm completely wrong, that they're getting up there and they're just, the law and society gospel is flowing like lava out of their mouths. But
I don't think you're wrong, but there is this really interesting dichotomy now between professors who are wearing 2 different hats. I mean, they have the research hat where they think of themselves as doing law.
Yes.
I mean, it's weird, right?
Yeah.
They think of themselves doing law in their research capacity, and yet.
But you know, one of our colleagues, now I wish it's a name, who I read one of his pieces recently, or his draft, and I said, this only has your name on it, but it's actually written by 2 people. One of them is Dr. X.
Yes.
The PhD in history, as it was. I said the other is written by Professor X, the law professor. I said the first part is wonderful, and the second part isn't really. But I mean, there is this dichotomy, but at least it's a dichotomy. There was a monocotomy, or whatever you call it, before. And so I think and the people in this room, in their institutions, have made a difference. I mean, this is something we haven't had sort of reports country by country, but if I may say so, and I could be contradicted, say a generation ago, there was just nothing in Mexico that could be described as the law and society. There was nothing in Israel that could be, there was nothing in Chile. And it's changed in these countries, maybe not the whole thing, but there's been a change. And I think SPILS has done it. I really do. Or it's had an influence. And Mauricio Duce, who was, we heard from earlier, he made a real difference to criminal justice reform in Chile. And one of the reasons why that reform is considered much more of a success than attempts in other countries is they tried first to do it in regions and see how it worked. I mean, that's a very simple idea, but not one that was normal in instituting a reform. Let's see how this actually works. We'll try it out in this province and that province. And I think, just a simple idea like that, but it's dazzlingly original in most societies. But Rogelio has this wonderful term, magic legalism. I mean, the idea that a statute is passed or a decision is made, and then magically there's an impact. Whereas in fact, it's more complicated. If you want, you can read Impact, How Law Affects Behavior by Lawrence M. Friedman, but you don't have to. That's my comment.
I'm getting the feeling that this is the last word appropriately. Before we close off and before I thank the panelists, I also want to thank the wonderful Mary Elizabeth
Yes,
Fitzpatrick,
thank
who's heading off. She should be thanked. She's wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you to Lawrence Friedman.